There are some massive companies out there that seem to be taking over the entire world. Today, sometimes we think everything has to be big to make an impact. But I'm going to talk to you today about why small could be the best thing that ever happened to you. I love Australia. And recently I was at the Christian Media and Arts Australia conference in Sydney talking about how small can be the new big. That was actually the theme of the whole conference. And they asked me to come, Nathan Brown and the team asked me to come down there and speak on the subject about how small is the new big. And let me tell you something, I've spent my whole career being small. Although we see around us companies like Google, companies like Amazon, companies like Apple that seem to be taking over the world, and we think sometimes that if we're going to make an impact, we have to be that way. Disney seems to be buying everybody from Marvel to Fox to everybody else. And we wonder sometimes, can small companies still make an impact? Or can we, as just a small team or an individual person, still make an impact? Let me tell you, I want to give you a handful of reasons why I believe small matters. I will stay small. I've had opportunities to merge with people. We've had opportunities to join in partnership with other organizations or other companies or other agencies. And the reason I've always kept my own path is I just believe there's power in being small. And I'm not embarrassed by it. I'm not ashamed of it. I think there are advantages to being small that the world of big just doesn't have. So listen to my ideas, listen to my reasons today, and you can decide for you if you want to work at a big organization, if you want to work at a small one. Certainly there are advantages and disadvantages of both. But let's talk a little bit about why small could be the best thing that ever happened to you. Number one, small doesn't care about your policies or your procedures. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, can I go into a list of all the situations I've run into with big organizations who had policies in place that were crippling them. You know, maybe something happened 10 years ago or 15 years ago, so they created a policy about that. But it's gotten totally irrelevant. The world has changed. That policy doesn't matter anymore, and yet they are a slave to that policy. And it goes to being ridiculous. My wife and I spoke at a leadership conference in Hawaii a few years ago, and I'll never forget, we were sitting out by the pool. We got there a day early. And we had an afternoon to ourselves. So we thought, all right, we're at the hotel pool, or we're at the hotel, let's go down to the pool and just hang out. And we went down to the pool, and it was funny. All of the umbrellas around the pool were over on one side in the shade. And all the chairs where people sat were on the other side of the pool. So I went up to the pool guy and I said, hey, can we move some of these umbrellas around so we can actually have some shade over here by where the chairs are? And he said, no, sir, we can't do that. And I said, well, why not? They're portable. I can just roll it over myself. He said, well, sir, it's our policy not to move the umbrellas. And I said, well, hold it a second. All the chairs for people to sit in are over here, but the umbrellas are all over here. I said, does that make sense to you? And he said, no, sir, it doesn't make sense, but it's our policy and I can't change that. Went to the manager. I mean, trust me, you don't talk to Kathleen, my wife, like that and have a policy that she doesn't understand. And she went to the manager and said, what's going on here? All we need is an umbrella over our chair. And even the manager said, I'm sorry, ma'am, but years ago we created a policy that the umbrellas stay on that side in the shade where nobody was. And the chairs where everybody was sitting is on the other side in the sun. He said, that's just our policy and that's the way we work here. I'll tell you what, it was the stupidest thing I've ever seen. And I've been, I travel a lot, as you know. So I've been in hotels all over the world that have similar, strange, I have to say, stupid policies. The sad thing is I've seen it in churches. I've seen it in ministries. I've seen it in nonprofit organizations. We branded a major ministry a number of years ago, and the donor development guy said during his tenure as the head of donor development for this big ministry, their donations had dropped 65% while he was there. And I said, hold it a second. That should be a red flag telling you you're not doing something right. Something's wrong here. He said, no. He said, years ago, we started a donor development policy and it worked back then and it should be working now. So we're going to stick to that policy, even though he saw that donations had dropped 65%. So here's the deal. In a small company, on a small team, in a small group, policies don't matter. On our team, Cooke Media Group, I don't think we have any policies except when it's time to go to lunch. We just don't have any policies at all. We're just cool. We're flexible. We're able to bend. We want to minister to help clients. We want to focus our company on helping our clients. And to do that, we can't have a bunch of policies and procedures that are in place. I mean, certainly over the years, and I've done this since 1991 is when we launched the company. So over those years, you can imagine we've had employees that didn't get it. We've had some employees over the years that made huge mistakes. And I wanted to say, look, from now on, we'll never do this again. But the truth is, they move on and things change and we get a better team. So the truth is, and this is something to remember if you're at a big church or a big nonprofit or a big ministry organization, don't let your policies and procedures drag you down. I'll tell you, it's an incredibly important thing. Sometimes that employee handbook is thicker than a Bible. I mean, it's a big, big book, and that just scares the life out of me. When you get that many rules and that many regulations, and I know we live in a difficult world, and when organizations are big, they need that kind of thing, which tells me again, small is a beautiful thing. Small doesn't care about your policies and your procedures. So if you're small, that gives you certain agility there. The second thing is small doesn't care about your salary or your office. You know what? When we started this company, we didn't make any money. Nobody made any money. We were just trying to figure out how to do projects for clients, and it was a huge risk. We were working out of a spare bedroom at the time. And I think it's important to remember that small can move on a dime because of that very thing. Size doesn't matter so much when it comes to your office, when it comes to your salary. Certainly everybody wants to make more money. I get that. But you know what? Small is about risk. It's about being willing to risk for the sake of your creative ideas, your vision, your dream. So I think you need to think in terms that small really, I actually, there's an apocryphal story out there. I can't remember which president it was. It may have been Woodrow Wilson, but one of our ex-presidents, after he finished being president of the United States, I'm told he went to Harvard to be a college president. And he did that very well for a number of years. And once he retired, a journalist asked him which was more difficult, being the president of the United States or being the president of a college. He said the most difficult job was being president of the college. They said, why? He said, because the stakes were so small. He said college professors would argue over carpet. They would argue over getting a window office. They would argue over the size of their office, where their office was located. And I'm not just ragging on colleges. It's true in businesses as well. I'll tell you, people get status off having a big office. They get status off having a window. They get status off being able to pick their carpet. All those things become a huge issue in a big company. That's why small is so free of that. You know what? We're in this together. We're a small team. In fact, it's funny when I talk to the leaders of big organizations that when they were the founders, they look back at those founding years and realize, wow, we miss that. We miss the spirit of camaraderie. We miss the passion, the fire that was burning inside of us. So you know what? Small really doesn't care about your salary or office. There's no time. There's no budget. There's no way ego can get in the way. The third thing that small, I think, is really great about being small is that small doesn't care about obsessive scheduling. Let me tell you, I worked at a large organization early in my career, and man, you had to schedule time off months and months and months in advance, sometimes a year in advance. You had to fill out reams of paperwork. We rebranded a television network years ago. And in the process, I learned that the production manager that ran all the producers at that network had, he had like 12 forms you had to fill out to get a piece of videotape. Back in those days, it was Beta SP. Just to get a piece of videotape to go out and shoot, you had to fill out 12 forms. Big organizations are locked into forms, man. That's amazing. And schedules and meetings. I think it's Thomas Sowell who said, anybody who loves meetings should never be in charge of anything. I totally agree with him. Small doesn't care about obsessive scheduling, about paperwork. And certainly, I'm not ragging on those things. They all matter at a big organization. You have to have that to coordinate that many people. But I'll tell you, when I think at our team of how few meetings we have, most of our meetings can be accomplished when I pass somebody's desk. Done for the day. That meeting is over instantly. We just solved the problem, or just using email or using messaging or Slack or some technique like that. Small helps you make that happen so much more quickly. So big organizations are often bound by meetings, nonstop meetings and scheduling and paperwork. And I just think small is all free of all that stuff. Number 4, small doesn't care about the organizational chart. One of the very frustrating things to me in large organizations is people are obsessed by the organizational chart. And I understand in a big business, you have to have some sense of organization. In fact, I think many HR professionals, that's the vast majority of their work, just making sure everybody's accountable to the right person and the departments are talking to the right people and the whole structure thing is working well. But I'll tell you, in small, it doesn't really matter. One of the things that I found in churches and ministries and nonprofits is a designer can't speak to the boss, whether it's a pastor or the CEO or the president. He's got to go through the chain of command, or she has to go through the chain of command. We see that in a lot of large companies. You've got to go through all this really weird chain of command just to get your ideas heard by the top guy. And trust me, just like in that childhood game where you whisper something in somebody's ear and then they whisper it in another ear and another and another, and you find by the time it gets to the end of the row, the message is completely changed. Boy, doesn't that happen in large organizations when you have to report through a ton of people. Small doesn't care about that. They do not care about the organizational chart. You can talk to anybody in your organization when you're small, and you can get your ideas heard by the boss, and the boss gets his ideas heard by anybody else. So small is great when it comes to the organizational chart. Number 5, small doesn't care about obstacles. Now, certainly we all have problems and challenges in our work. Creativity, sometimes we come up with ideas and we can't figure out how to execute those ideas. But the problem is, I think small organizations adapt better to challenges because in many ways, it's all they've ever known. I'll tell you, when you're small, you don't have a big staff. When you're small, you don't have a ton of resources. So every day, you're overcoming challenges, and you get into a mindset where suddenly obstacles and challenges are not a big problem. I actually have a friend who was a producer at a big network for years, and he was an executive producer at a very high level, and he was really good at what he did. And one day he decided he wanted to own his own business and launch his own production company, so he did. He lasted about 6 months. You know why? He was so used to having a big staff, so used to having a big department, so used to having tons of equipment, big resources, that when he got on his own and it was just him and an assistant, he just couldn't survive that. He just could not survive it. He needed a scheduling department to work on his travel arrangements. He needed a staff of assistants because he didn't really need it, obviously. Let me tell you, he didn't really need it. He was just used to it. When you're big, you get used to having these resources that small organizations don't. I'm telling you, every project is a challenge when you're small. Every idea is an obstacle when you're small. But you just get in this mindset of, hey, that's the way life is. That's the world is. We're just going to move ahead. I tell you, one of my problems when we consult with a lot of large organizations is people just complain all day long. I'll tell you, I'll go to work with a big organization, and I'll have somebody, maybe 3 or 4 people over the course of a day, pull me aside just to complain about stuff in that group. Let me tell you something. They're not used to obstacles. They're not used to challenges. In fact, I can tell you tons of times when we've gone in to consult, whether it's rebranding an organization, redesigning their website, creating a short film platform for them, or doing documentaries for them, or fundraising videos, whatever, all the stuff we do. When we go into these organizations, there's usually somebody there in the media department, most often, who doesn't want us there. He doesn't need this guy and this team from LA to come in and tell him what to do. It's not what we do. He doesn't realize that, but he thinks we're going to come and tell him what to do. And he's locked in. He doesn't want to be challenged. He or she doesn't want to have any new ideas. They don't want to have to overcome that stuff. But I'll tell you, when you're small, that's all you ever do. So relish the moment. If you're small, it's a great, great thing because obstacles don't cripple you like they often do in a large organization. And by the way, budgets. I got to mention budgets here the same way. Small organizations don't have the big budget that a lot of large organizations do, but we learn to be creative. We learn to make the most. And don't get me wrong, I love big budgets. They're awesome to have. I mean, on the projects where we've had big budgets, they've been an incredibly great thing. However, we're not crippled when we don't get the big budget for that product. Or that project. So I love the idea that small handles budgets even well as well. So number 6, small doesn't care about regular meetings. probably the single biggest distinctive I see in large organizations is regular meetings. You know, the minute I walk into a studio or a ministry or a large church or nonprofit and see that little scheduling thing on the conference room door, when they have to have a little scheduling thing or an online app to schedule their meetings, you know, they're probably having too many meetings. But it happens on a regular basis. In fact, let me tell you something, and I'm not against meetings. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against meetings. But sometimes there's always in big organizations people who feel like meetings are accomplishing something. And I know technically they do, but the idea that people feel like they've really moved the ball forward if they sat in a meeting for a couple hours. That's not what meetings are for. That's not what meetings are for, but people get confused, so they schedule more and more meetings. But let me read you these statistics that I thought was interesting. Leaders today average 31 hours a month in meetings. Let me repeat that. Leaders today average 31 hours a month in meetings. It's estimated that half of that time is wasted. Half of that time is wasted. 31 hours a month. That's almost an entire work week is wasted in meetings. And I shouldn't say wasted in meetings, but they have they spend that time in meetings, and half of that time is wasted. 73% of professionals admit to doing unrelated work in meetings. That means more than 2/3 of your team is answering emails or doing social media or reading a blog or doing something else when they're in your meeting. 73% of professionals say they do unrelated tasks while they're in meetings. And 39% of professionals admit to dozing off in meetings. Now, that's amazing. 39% of professionals admit to dozing off in meetings. I'll tell you, small teams have meetings standing up. They have meetings on the run. They have meetings at lunch. They have meetings on the move. Again, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-meeting because I know I'll get a bunch of emails from people that are going to criticize me for being anti-meeting. You've got to get information out. But let me tell you, there's a lot better ways very often for getting that information out other than having a meeting. And meetings go too long, and you know what? We'll do another episode on meetings. Don't get me off on that. But it's important that knowing that you don't need regular meetings. You don't have regular meetings. You don't have time for regular meetings. You're accomplishing something. So I love that about being small. Number 7, finally, small doesn't care about certainty. You know, the bigger the organization, the more there is at risk. So naturally, they lean toward being absolutely sure before they make a decision. I wrote an interesting note about St. Paul's missionary journey to Macedonia. In fact, I made a note here in the New Testament book of Acts chapter 16. Here's what it says. Paul and his companions traveled throughout the region of Phrygia and Galatia, having been kept by the Holy Spirit from preaching the word in the province of Asia. Now, keep in mind, these are probably, Paul is probably the greatest missionary in the history of the world. But even he didn't have a plan. And he got turned away from different places. He was taking a risk, and it was okay with him. The Holy Spirit turned him away, changed his plans. He was just going where the doors opened. And that's what I love about being small. Now, had he worked with a big missionary organization today, had Paul been working with a big denominational missions outreach, man, he'd have had to clear that change of plans. He'd had to go through a lot of meetings, a lot of strategy, a lot of justification for moving in a different direction. But you know what? Paul was one guy. At the most, he had a couple people with him. And guess what? They were able to change plans on a dime. I just think that's so important to think about. Small organizations can change. They're not as concerned about certainty as they are about the mission. And boy, I tell you, that's a word I would leave with you today. It's not about the mission. It's not about certainty as much as it is about the mission. And very often in big organizations, as I said, because there's so much at risk, they want to weigh it in the balance, and they need to be absolutely certain before they go off. So let's review why small matters, because I really want to encourage you. If you're a small designer, a small agency, a small film production or video production company, or some small ministry organization, I'll tell you what, enjoy today. Be inspired, because being small, don't get frustrated because you're not as big as you feel like you want to be or you ought to be. Number 1, small doesn't care about your policies and procedures. Number 2, small doesn't care about your salary or office. Number 3, small doesn't care about obsessive scheduling. Number 4, small doesn't care about the organizational chart. Number 5, small doesn't care about obstacles. I love that. It's all they've ever known, so they're used to dealing with obstacles. Whereas many times, people and leaders in large organizations freak out when a challenge happens. Number 6, small doesn't care about regular meetings. They know how to get information where it needs to be and how to get information from where they need to get it from. So they don't have to have regular meetings. They're not so caught up in that. And as I read the statistics, we waste an enormous amount of time in meetings. And the last thing, number 7, small doesn't care about certainty. I think that is so incredibly important. Listen to me. Don't ever be embarrassed, ashamed about being small. I'll tell you, God can use you in an amazing way, no matter what your size. But being small gives you a certain ability to change course, be nimble, move in different directions. And remember this, Amazon.com started with one man and a desk. Never forget that. By the way, on the way to being big, as you're small right now, I created the unique planner to help you plan out your life. You may be small, but let me tell you something. You need tools and resources that will help your dream happen. And if you go to uniquecreativeplanner.com, by the way, you can see videos about how to use it, why I came up with it, why I created it. And I'll tell you, I'm getting some amazing stories from people that are using it. uniquecreativeplanner.com. Go check it out, because I'll tell you, when you start looking at print as a way to plan your day, focus and reflect, and really separate your priorities from the rest of your day, it will start changing your productivity in an amazing, amazing way. Remember, it's not about being busy. It's about accomplishing something. It's not about being busy. It's about accomplishing something. And my unique planner will really help you do that very thing. And always check us out at philcooke.com, Cooke with an E. And we'd love for you to share this with friends. If you have somebody that you know who is small, who has a small agency or company or a church, pastor of a really small church, I'm telling you, these very principles could make a big difference for that person. So share it. Let us know if it's helped you or not. Give us some suggestions for your own ideas that we could address on these episodes, because we would love to share information that will help take your creative career from where you are to where you want to be. Thanks for tuning in.